Hello, podcast fam. I am thrilled to share some exciting news. My book, So Grow Lead, is officially live on Amazon. This book is more than just my story of starting a nonprofit and building a peanut butter factory in Malawi. So trust me, the ups and downs of that journey are worth the read. It's also packed with practical strategies to help nonprofit leaders like you tackle challenges with clarity, courage, and a whole lot of heart. If you've ever wondered how to turn your vision into reality, navigate the inevitable hurdles, and build something meaningful, whether in your organization or in your own life, this book is for you. I'd be so grateful for your support in spreading the word. Grab your copy of So Grow Lead in the show notes and on Amazon today. Let's keep sowing seeds of impact together. Are you a nonprofit professional who's feeling overwhelmed and burnt out? Well, welcome to the Lead with Heart podcast. I am your host, Haley Cooper. On this podcast, we will share stories of leadership, courage, and empathy that'll help you learn to take care of yourself, your staff, organization, and community. You will hear from nonprofit leaders who have been in your shoes and have learned best practices to raise more revenue and make a greater impact. Let's thrive together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Lead with Heart podcast. I am so excited, and I say this every time, but just so excited and honored to have Jordana Merkin from Voice for Good. We have known each other ever since I started my consulting business, and I'm just so grateful for her and just all of her wonderful advice and just friendship as a consultant and as a mom. And today, we're going to talk all about creating clarity internally, so that helps with your external marketing. And a little bit about Jordana. After a decade of in-house nonprofit marketing, she founded Voice for Good to bring her insider knowledge and outsider perspective to help growing nonprofits clarify their messaging to connect to those who matter most to achieving their mission. Her work as a mission-driven marketer includes messaging guides, communication strategy, and copywriting. And we all know how much we need help with clarifying our messaging. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. Yeah, as you said, we've had a long history in our businesses, so it's good to chat this way too.
I would love to know. So I also had a career as an in-house nonprofit fundraiser, just like you had one as an in-house nonprofit marketer. And I would love to know, you were in it for 10 years. What got you started, one, with marketing in the first place and led you to that now branch out on your own and really hone down on where you're focusing?
Yeah. So I majored in English in college. I've always been a big reader, a big writer, and that was really just what I was drawn to. At the same time, I also minored in both sociology and creative writing. And as I got closer to graduating, I was thinking about what to do with all of those things. And I really was just fascinated by advertising and marketing and really the ways people think en masse and how to make that mass communication personal. And so I was going through classes in those areas, and I went to college in New York City and I did a few internships in those areas. And that was fun and exciting. But at the end of the day, I really enjoyed the type of work I was doing, but I didn't care at all about the things I was marketing. So I knew I needed to be marketing a mission. So my first job out of college was at a nonprofit. I was at the National Down Syndrome Society for several years. And then, as you said, I was in-house in similar capacities for about a decade. And I never looked back from nonprofit marketing communication. And then the more work I did in this space, the more I realized that you need to have a strong message at the core of your marketing, because otherwise you're amplifying a hollow message and it's not going to land with the right people. So when I went out on my own and started my business, I knew that strong messaging really had to be at the core of all of that marketing communications. Strategic marketing communications is important, and having a plan is important. And I still work on that with nonprofits as well. But it's only worth as much as the strength of your message and the clarity of your message at its core.
Yes, I love that. And I think, like you, I'm not a marketer, and a lot of people, we're not going to go down that road. But as a fundraiser, people are like, can you do marketing? But I love studying marketing. I did a class in college when I thought I wanted to be a communications major, but that is not my strength. So I quickly switched. But it was all about marketing, about like propaganda and how people marketed. And it just fascinated me. And I think you're right about messaging. And a lot of where we align is focusing on the internal messaging and internal connection so that you can externally communicate your mission. And I know that's really what you focus on. And so I just love your messaging and brand focus and everything that you post on Instagram and LinkedIn. And so I would love you to, well, one, share what your tagline is, because I'm probably butchering it. But how does internal clarity with an organization contribute to the effectiveness of external marketing efforts? Like you said, you need that internal messaging to then be able to execute that marketing calendar.
Yeah, no, you're good. You're not butchering it. That is really what it's all about. It's about having that internal clarity so that you can connect with the right people externally. So, when I work with an organization, I always start with the question, what do you do? It sounds pretty basic. And yet, if you ask, I work primarily with smaller organizations. And even when there's one person really, but let's say a three people team, with like even a board member and a volunteer and an executive director. And if you ask each of those people, what do they do? Odds are you're not going to get exactly the same answer from all three. And that's a problem, right? Because then when they're out there in the world talking about what they do, they're not presenting a cohesive front. And so then those people are going to say, well, oh, I heard this about this organization. And someone else is going to say, well, I heard that about this organization. Or worse yet, they're not going to say anything at all because it's not memorable when you're not specific and you're not clear. So that's always where I start because when someone says, what do you do? That's really an opportunity to answer with why do you do, right? And to share that impact of your mission. And if there isn't that clarity, then that's when you're going to lose people. So it's important to have that clarity internally, whether you have a team of 3 or 30 or 300, because you really all need to be using the same language to share the same message. And so often at nonprofits, we work in silos. Again, whether you have a small team or a larger team, when someone answers that question differently than the next person, it's not that anyone is misinformed. They're all answering in a way that is true to them and their work. But really, you need to be answering in a more global way so that you can really be sharing your mission and sharing the impact of that mission. And that's how you're going to connect with people externally. And so the clearer you are on that internally, the more successful you'll be externally. The more memorable you'll be, the more you'll stand out from the crowd, and the more you'll cut through the noise. When I answer that what do you do and go through that exercise with an organization, what we eventually get to is what I call the big picture story, right? That's how you answer with that why. And when you have one big picture story that everyone internally is clear on, you are reminded that you share one purpose, right? One goal, one organizational voice. And that's how that's really going to be amplified out even louder. Sometimes in organizations, there's this feeling of it's my priority or your priority, or even on a smaller team, there can still be this sense of us versus them because we're all so passionate about our work and how it relates to the mission. But when you're aware internally of that big picture story, then it's really that reminder also that you're all on the same team working toward that same goal. And that's how you're going to really connect with people externally around that goal too.
Yeah, I love that. I've experienced this so many times with nonprofits. My last job as director of development, I walked into the organization and I sat down all the directors and the CEO, and I was like, what do we do? Because I heard 5 different things from each of the directors because they were all leading different things and they were all passionate about there were multiple programs within this organization. And so they were all passionate about the specific one that they were focusing on. And that's what they would communicate instead of communicating, like you said, the big picture of the organization. And I was like, we got to nail this down because for me as a fundraiser, it's really hard to sell an organization or self, for lack of a better term, but a mission when I don't even know it. Like you said, the donor doesn't know because they're confused because everyone's communicating a separate message. So I love that you do the what we do and get down to the why. But you mentioned some of the pain points, but let's say an organization does have multiple programs. How do you really make it that big picture and then be able to showcase those individual programs? Or is that
Mhm.
even the right way to do it?
No, I think, yeah, no, it's a great question. So, the exercise I do around how to answer that question to get to that big picture story, that what do you do question, is we go through an exercise called the three whys. And so we start with what do you do? And that's usually one person's version of the story, right? And so we take all those different what do you do's and from there, we'll say, well, why is that important? And then we'll come up with an answer to that and then say, well, why is that important? And come up with an answer to that. And we ask that a minimum of 3 times. But usually, when you dig down, you peel back the layers of that onion at least 3 times, you get to a point where you can craft that big picture story. Where even when you have all these different program areas, there's that big picture of why all of these things are important and how they all tie together. And then when you root all of your messaging in that clear big picture story, then you can talk about all the different things, right? There's no saying that you have to only do one particular program, but you want to be talking about those programs in a way that's cohesive to make it seem like, not to make it seem, because it is all part of the same organization, right? And that's what you want to be conveying. So that's generally where I start. But it's definitely challenging when everyone has their own area, but we need to take a step back and think, okay, we're all part of the same organization. We're all raising money toward this mission. So when you have a big picture story that's rooted in your mission and you remember what that mission is about, then that's when you're really going to achieve that clarity. And it's hard, right? That's also why I often refer to my insider knowledge and outsider perspective, right? Because it's hard to, when your nose is to the grindstone and you're in the weeds every day, it's hard to take that step back and say, well, of course it's clear we do all of these things, but to an outsider, or in your case, to an insider, it's not always so clear. So I think going through that exercise is always a good place to start.
Imagine a fundraising partner that not only helps you raise more money, but also supports you in retaining your donors. A partner that helps you raise funds both online and on location so you can grow your impact faster. That's DonorBox, a comprehensive suite of tools, services, and resources that give fundraisers just like you a custom solution to tackle your unique challenges, helping you achieve the growth and sustainability your organization needs, helping you help others. Visit donorbox.org to learn more. Yes, I love that you really break it down and get to the core. And you talked a lot about building that internal clarity and making sure, I think that helps break down the silos. But after you do this exercise, how do you keep, I think a lot of organizations struggle with keeping the messaging and the why and the vision at the forefront of what they do and continuing to remind people. I talk a lot about they matter to the mission, they matter to the vision, they matter to contributing to whatever you're putting out in the messaging or what your core messaging is. So how do you find that organizations can successfully keep that at the forefront to continue to break down those silos so everyone knows that everyone matters?
So, yeah, it's a really good question. I think a lot about Seth Godin famously says, people like us do things like this. And in terms of all communication, both internal and external, that's something that's really important to keep in mind. So, not just what are you talking about or why do you do what you do, but who are you talking to, right? So that starts again internally. Who are the people who work there and why do they matter, right? To your point, why is each person integral to the mission and to achieving it? And I think when you think in terms of those terms, first of all, it can be as simple as once you have your big picture story, writing it out, print out a card that has it on there and print out the mission and make sure that they're aligned and then have everyone have it at their desk or on a note in front of them. And because it's important to be able to reference, it's also important to be able to reference on the tough days, right? We all have tough days. And when you can, again, root that your tough day, the nitty gritty details of whatever happened in that day to your big picture story, then it makes you feel like you matter because you know that you're contributing to something bigger. And that to me is the beauty of working at a mission driven organization as opposed to selling toothbrushes or whatever else you're doing. Shade selling toothbrushes, they're important. That to me is why I so enjoy working in and around the nonprofit sector. So that's where I would start. in terms of that. And then again, just considering that people like us do things like this also applies to, so you'll have greater retention that way, right? When you can make everyone, and this applies to your work definitely, or you can make people feel like they are contributing, important, like they matter, like you said. It's also how you're going to attract the right kind of talent. Because if you're using certain words, when I go through messaging with an organization, we get very specific into the words that they use and the words that they don't use. And often those words that they don't use are even more important than the ones, they should not use, or even more important than the ones that they should. And that applies internally too, as well, right? Because when you put out, let's say, a job description and it, speaks to me, then people like me apply to jobs like this. People like me want to work at an organization like this. And then when you can echo that same sentiment and that same big picture story and those same words through your external communications, then it shifts, right? To people like me volunteer with organizations like this. People like me support organizations like this. So it really, beginning with that strong message internally is how it will resonate externally as well.
Ooh, I love those examples. And I love that quote. I'm going to have to look it up. And I wanted to shift a little bit to the board, because you had mentioned like a board member could have their own idea of what the organization does. And each board member joins an organization for a why. Like they join because of something they care about, or a family member experienced something related to the mission, or they themselves experienced something in childhood related to the mission. There's a number of whys behind why someone joins an organization and decides to step on the board. However, I've come across a lot of board of directors who are confused about what the organization does, because the organization, the CEO, the leaders haven't done a good job of communicating to the board what they do. And so I would love to know, how do you then equip a board with, is the board a part of this process that you do? If not, like, how do you equip them to then be ambassadors on behalf of the organization with that clear messaging? Because I feel like there's a lot of reasons why nonprofit boards are a pain point and don't communicate. But I think one of those is they don't know what the organization does and aren't empowered to then go communicate it out.
So yeah, it's a great question. When I work with an organization, I put together, generally the first thing we do together is work on a messaging guide. And a messaging guide is an internal guide that externs all external communication. And so it covers what you do, who you do it for, who you're talking to, why you do it, and how you talk about it. So a lot of that is what we've already discussed, right? Your big picture story, the words you're going to use. It also covers your voice, tone, and style, how you sound like you, right? Again, so that board members, staff members, and external supporters, volunteers, whatever it is, can again see themselves in your communication and feel connected. So in terms of board members, I would consider it, so it depends on the organization, is the short answer to, do I include board members in this exercise? So I leave that to usually the ED or the founder, whoever it is I'm working with, to decide who should be in these conversations. But whether or not they're in the conversations, I always say that the board members should definitely be reading this messaging guide when it's done, or future board members, as part of their onboarding process, whatever that looks like, they should be reading this. And it's not necessarily, again, something you put out there. Your big picture story is not really something you put out word for word in writing generally, though you can use elements of it. But it's important that they know how to answer that question, because exactly, like, they'll come on because something sounds like it resonates with them, but then that's not actually what it is, or that's not really the way that it should be talked about, or something like that. So again, when you have this messaging guide in place, then you're starting from a place of strength. You're starting from a place of this cohesive message where everyone is on the same page, and where even before they accept the board position, if they've already been in conversations where this language has been used, then there are no surprises. So then they get to the board, their first board meeting, or whenever they receive this packet and they're reading through and it resonates. It's not, oh, I didn't know that's how we talk about it, or I didn't realize that was a key differentiator about this organization. So I think starting from that place as well, because your board members should be your ambassadors. And the only way to amplify that message is to have a clear message, right? Because if they have one idea, you're talking about it a different way, then you're spiting yourself when you have all these conflicting messages out there. Or again, not even conflicting, just different, right? They don't necessarily even need to be in conflict, but it's not going to be clear and then it won't be memorable to anybody else.
Hey there, podcast family. If you're like me and deeply committed to improving your leadership skills and fostering better connections with your team, I've got something truly amazing to share with you. I'm proud to introduce the EMC Masterclass, something I talk about often as a certified trainer. It's an incredible program developed by the renowned Dr. Lola Gershfeld, an organizational psychologist and corporate emotional connection expert. You might remember her from a podcast episode where she shared invaluable insights into the world of emotional connection. Dr. Gershfeld's EMC Leaders courses are designed for anyone working with people, whether you're a manager, supervisor, team leader, educator, coach, mentor, or a team member. This program is truly for everyone looking to enhance their communication and collaboration skills to raise more revenue for their mission. Now, let me tell you why the EMC Masterclass is a game changer. Dr. Gershfeld's groundbreaking emotional connection process has been integrated into top universities' curriculum and recognized by international organizations like ICF, HRCI, and SHRM. Humans are wired to seek emotional safety, and when we feel safe, we're more likely to take risks, share innovative ideas, and collaborate effectively. The EMC process is the catalyst for creating that emotional safety within your team. The virtual EMC Masterclass consists of 8 modules with 4 hours of expertly recorded material, 13 quizzes to reinforce your learning, and a workbook filled with activities for offline practice and something I still refer to daily. Ready to become an emotional connection master? Dr. Gershfeld is offering an exclusive detail for our podcast listeners. Use the code LEADWITHHEART to enjoy a generous 10% discount on the EMC Masterclass. Head over to emcleaders.com and enroll in the EMC Masterclass today. Yes, I love that. And I love that you provide a messaging guide so that everyone throughout the organization can have that same voice, tone, and messaging. And I wanted to shift a little bit because you talk a lot about building emotional connection externally, and I talk a lot about it building internally, which I think, like we said, building that internal messaging can build emotional connection. I remember you posting on your LinkedIn about building emotional connection. And I think for me, and you can clarify, like the why is where you start with that emotional connection. So how do you build that? Because people give emotionally and then they think rationally, right? And so how do you then start to communicate to emotionally connect people to the mission? What are steps that you can take to really drive that forward?
Yeah. So storytelling is generally at the heart of that, right? So we talk about a big picture story. And then we talk about day-to-day stories, which are the ones that you tend to think of, that one tends to think of when they think about nonprofit storytelling. But I always talk about connecting the two, right? So you have your big picture story, and then your day-to-day stories need to support that big picture story. Because then you can also think about how to collect stories. And again, to your point earlier, that everyone internally matters. Everyone matters in terms of story collection also. This is one area where I find there also tends to be a very us versus them. And I would love to hear your experience also as a development director, where it's, well, marketing has this agenda and development has this agenda, and the program directors have a different agenda, and everyone is possessive over their stories and no one wants to share. I don't know if that's your experience, but it's been mine. And I've heard that from others as well.
Yeah, definitely been my experience. And one, I think because people don't understand why fundraising needs the stories. And so in my experience from what I've done is like really prioritizing the client and making sure that the program director understands that I really care about their confidentiality and their dignity. And I'm not just getting a story to exploit these people, but that it really helps with the mission. So it's always permission based, right? I'm like, you can ask this person if they want to share their story from their words. And obviously, I might tweak it a little bit, change names, maybe not share their story if they don't, or their picture if they don't want me to, but really coming from that place of understanding that the client is first. If the donor might want a story, the donor might want that connection, but our mission and our who we serve is first. So that's at least the way that I've approached it. And that has then built that relationship to collect those stories. And I think also for me, being able to, I've served at a lot of grassroots organizations. So I've been able to volunteer. So I've been able to hear some of those stories and then just generally not fabricate them, but put an idea of what the needs are and turn that into a story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So I love all of that. And I use a lot of the same strategies in terms of getting everyone on the same page, right? Like that ethical storytelling piece that we're going to give the beneficiary, the storyteller, a voice in their own story and consent and all of the things that are so important for those we serve, but also, again, internally, right? To make sure that we're all on the same page and that we all have, as you said, an understanding of why we're collecting these stories, how they're going to be used, to be really transparent about that. Yeah, I'm going to put this in a fundraising appeal, or I'm going to put this in part of this awareness campaign, or I'm going to use them in these ways. But this is how we're going to tell the stories ethically. And this is how we're going to be fair to those who are telling the stories. And yeah, if they're not comfortable with their name or their photo, or ultimately even their whole story, right? That happens sometimes too. But really all getting that alignment internally so that there is less of that siloed approach to storytelling and there's less of that possessiveness of that's my story and I don't want to exploit that person. So again, this collection, the storytelling collection, and of really having this clear sense that everyone's stories matter. I also think it's important that not every story has to be this like groundbreaking, gigantic, oh my goodness moment of storytelling. And often that's what we think of, this life-changing moment. And those are special. And that's amazing when that does happen. But also thinking smaller in terms of what makes a, quote unquote, good story. So again, coming to it from a shared perspective of the big picture story and the why we're here really helps inform those day-to-day stories. And then that's where the emotion comes in, right? Because that's that emotional connection is generally through storytelling, because your audience might not have experienced the exact thing that you're talking about, but they have experienced the emotion behind what they're talking about, right? They know what it feels like to struggle with something. They know what it feels like to be frustrated by something. They know what it feels like to be saddened by something. So I think really thinking about what is the primary emotion in each communication that you want to be conveying to your audience, and then thinking about how to tell that story so that it reflects that. I think that's how you get that emotional core piece. And again, both like that internal buy-in to inform that external communication.
Yes, I love that. And I love that you said it doesn't always have to be like big stories. Always would ask my program directors and managers, like, what's something that you learned today that you just can't get off your mind? And what is the story that you couldn't do something because you didn't have the resources and you were heartbroken by it? Because that's then where I can go and find support to make this story end and make this story like successful, right? And I don't know if that's the right approach, but those are the ones where you get that emotion, where you get that heart connection of just, I really want to help this person, and being able to communicate that. Again, not out of a place of exploitation, but out of a place of really wanting to support the purpose behind our mission and this person, whatever that mission is. And I would love to know, this question that just came to my mind was, what are primary emotions that lead people to action? Are there certain primary emotions that you think of, all like the UNICEF or the sad dog commercials we all grew up with, and we're moving away from that, right? That exploitation, that sad, yeah. But anyways, I would love to know, do you know what primary emotions lead people to action?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And yes, we are definitely moving away from the poverty porn and the sad crying children and animals. And yeah, we have so much thrown at us in every direction, and the world is hard enough, and people are not looking for that. People actively turn away from that. It also is, it's the primary emotion there is guilt, right? Like you're guilting people into doing it. So even if they don't turn away, and those campaigns have been really successful in the past, that's why they keep doing them, or it's why they had been done for so long. What you're leading with there is guilt. So when you lead with guilt, you may get someone to make a donation in that moment, but they're not invested in your why. They're not invested in your impact. They're like, I'm just going to make this donation so this goes away. And that's not really what you want. You want someone who feels emotionally connected and feels uplifted by your work, right? You want to partner with this organization so that you can make all of these wonderful things happen for whatever the cause is. So, to your point about transformation, right? I love the question that you would ask yourself about what couldn't you get done today? Because then we can tell that story in a way of transformation, right? Here's what happened. There was this problem, and then here we are to offer the solution. Come join us in making the solution happen. Because you do want to tell a story of one person is really powerful, and that's how you're going to connect. And a story of transformation for that person made possible by your organization. So, and then inviting the donor to partner with you in making that happen. So again, with all the pieces of that, the ethical piece, and we want to be respectful, and it's not the whole other conversation about who's the hero of the story, but really, right? You have the person you're serving and the organization and the donor all together in your community is what makes this happen, right? So I would say, yeah, that you want to have that transformation. And so positive emotions actually are really what you want to be driving. Starting from a place of someone was so stressed and panicked because of X, Y, and Z, but then this transformation happened and your reader can, or your viewer, video or whatever medium you're using, that's what they can relate to. Everyone's been stressed and then they've had that sense of relief because of something that happened. So I think it's that transformation. It's both. So it's starting in that place, but you don't want to leave people in that place.
Yes, I love that. I love that. Leaving people feeling uplifted. I want to ask, I know that there's a lot of like marketing platforms and ways to communicate the stories. And I know the Thread app or whatever, I haven't even gone on it. There's just so many new things, and nonprofits are already so bogged down with so many things on their to-do list. Oh, now I have to utilize a new app. Is this even gonna, there was Reels and TikTok and all of the things. Like, how can people, I guess it's probably an individual nonprofit decision, but what are some practical tips that you have for nonprofits to successfully communicate their story? I know there can be multiple different ways that a story can be communicated. So what have you found to be most successful?
Yeah. So definitely depends on the organization and the audience. So what I always advise is what I would say actually is universally true is you can't be everywhere. So then you don't need to be. So I think it makes sense to choose 2, maybe 3 platforms that feel the most comfortable to whoever is doing the posting, and also align those platforms with where your ideal audiences are. So if you feel super comfortable on TikTok, but your audiences are maybe older or whatever it is, and they're not necessarily on TikTok, then maybe that's not the best place to be. Though it could maybe be your secondary or your third if it's somewhere you really enjoy being. Social media can very quickly feel like a chore. So it's important to feel comfortable in the platform that you choose. So I would say whatever's realistic to whoever's doing the posting. So if that's LinkedIn, then lean in there. If that's Instagram, then lean in there. There's no one right answer other than whatever works for you, right? Whatever works for you, whatever works for your audience, the center of that Venn diagram is where you should be investing your time. And I would also say that when you're posting on multiple platforms, and I would also consider email. I think everyone should have some kind of email presence. So between email and whatever social media platforms you choose, definitely be repurposing your content. Repurposing, I think it's a bad rap. People think it's lazy. It's not. It's smart. it's
Yeah.
People are not consuming your content in the way that you are. So just because of the way the algorithms work, the odds are that people are not actually going to see everything across every platform. So that's the first thing that, even if you're using the exact same thing across different channels, they're not seeing it that way. But even if they do see it in a few different channels, that's actually a good thing. People have so much thrown at them, as we said, right? There's so much going on in social media and everywhere. I don't need to start. It's 2023. There's a lot going on. So having the frequent reminders is huge, right? There's the marketing rule of 7 that people need to see something at least 7 times to take action. That rule of 7 was actually created almost 100 years ago in the 1930s by the film industry. So if you think that in the 1930s, they needed 7 times. Now we need what, like 700 times?
Yeah,
I'm not
seriously.
advocating for that either. I think repurposing obviously benefits the person creating the posts because you don't need to reinvent the wheel. But also, it really benefits your consumers, also the consumers of your content. So, really, everyone's a winner. So, I just want to put that out there because I hear often, well, no, we don't want to be redundant, or doesn't it look lazy if we're just doing the same thing everywhere? And it doesn't. And you should be doing the same thing everywhere, not necessarily in exactly the same way. You may do a carousel post on Instagram and a single image on LinkedIn or whatever it is, but the content itself does not need to be rewritten each and every time.
Yes, I love that. I'm always like, you have to have consistency, especially if you're doing a campaign, like from your social media posts to your emails to the website. You can all say the same story because people need to follow that storyline. And like you said, you see it at least 7 times to actually take action. I would love to know before we wrap up, are there any metrics that people can, once they start posting or utilizing these certain platforms, like how do you coach them? I feel like most leaders like the ROI or whatever. So, and there's so many. I have a CEO I work with, and every time there's like an unsubscribe, he's like, someone unsubscribe from my email. And I'm like, well, your email list is a little, I'm here to write the emails, but your email list is a little messy. If you segmented it, you probably wouldn't see as many unsubscribes. And so I'm like, that's not a good metric to use. And I know, especially with email marketing, click rates and open rates have changed a little bit because of the algorithms. So, what are some key metrics that people can use to track that success?
Yeah. Yeah. So to your point, I would not sweat the unsubscribes unless you see like a gigantic spike rather, and unsubscribes, then maybe something's going on, but in that particular email. But in general, if someone's unsubscribing, then they don't want to hear from you ever again, right? Think about what it means to unsubscribe. They're not just, oh, I didn't want this email today. They're like, I want nothing to do with you. So if that's the case, then I know no one wants to hear that about their organization, but let them go because you don't want to waste your time on those people anyway. And again, the clearer your messaging is, the more you will attract the right people for you, the more that you lean into your unique voice and tone and style, the more people will be attracted to who you are as an organization. And those who are not interested in that can leave because you'll be growing a stronger list. In terms of specific metrics, yes, open rates are definitely harder to pin down at this point. Clicks are a little bit more reliable still at this point, but I would say think more about benchmarks than metrics as a whole, and benchmarks specific to your organization, because you can look at overall benchmarks. There are some great stats out there for all different sizes of nonprofits and what the industry standards are. But at the end of the day, you want to be improving upon yourself. So start small, right? Think about if you're going to try to increase your list, how many people do you have on your list now? Or to your point about segmentation, if you spend time segmenting your list, then how many people do you have in each segment? And how can you grow those quarter over quarter or year over year? Or again, whatever's realistic to you. Because I think messaging is a long game, right? You're going to see that increase over time. It's not like you just flip a switch and so now everything's clear, right? You need to work your way in with people and build those relationships. And also, one thing we didn't talk about is we talked internal versus external. But when I talk about external, I always start from within, like growing from within. So what do you do about your current audiences? What does that look like about the people already on your list, the people already following you? And how do you engage them? And how do you use your clear messaging to build those relationships? And from there, you can grow to reach new people and to get exposed to new audiences. So again, those are all different things you can be tracking, right? You can be tracking engagement on your social media posts and also the number of followers, right? And those are different things. What does that look like? So I think again, just to go back to what's realistic, right? So what's realistic for you? You can't track everything. So think about what your goals are and what you are looking to achieve, and then which particular metrics can help you reach them. And then try not to think about all of the things at once. Just like you can't be on all of the platforms, you can't track everything at once. So think about what best serves you and your organization.
Ooh, so good. And I love that you said, because I always say this when I give fundraising advice, I'm like, you probably have people in your database that already connected to you somehow that are just waiting for you to communicate to them and get them engaged. And somehow you don't always need to go acquire new people. That's not what it's about. It's about connecting with the people who are already connected with your mission. There's obviously time for acquisition and finding new people, but like you said, it's that natural progression of once you invite someone in, they're going to go communicate it or new people will come. Before I ask where people can find you, this is one of my favorite questions I've been asking my podcast guests. What is lighting you up or bringing you joy now?
That's a great question. This topic, I could talk about nonprofit messaging all day. But also, in particular, I've had a number of really great conversations lately with nonprofit leaders, right? Because it's one thing to talk about it to someone in your position, Ailey, but it's another thing to have a conversation with the nonprofit leader who is currently struggling with this or is wondering why their messaging isn't landing. And I'm never there to completely reinvent the wheel. It's their mission and they know their work better than anyone. But again, that insider knowledge and outsider perspective is just helpful in crafting that. And I love being able to work my passion of messaging and words and connection to help nonprofit leaders really work their missions and achieve their goals. So
yeah, I love that. And if people want to chat with you about all things nonprofit messaging or just follow along, where can they find you?
Yeah. So on my website, I have some nonprofit messaging guide prompts if someone wants to get started on their own with some of the things that we talked about here today. That's at voiceforgoodmarketing.com/freebies. And I am on LinkedIn, Jordana Merkin. I am on Instagram at Voice for Good, and I'm happy to chat.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I have learned a lot, and it's just always such a joy to get to talk to you.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me.
If you have valued these stories or learned something from what you've heard, please share this podcast episode or follow me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for your support, and together we can build a better community and world.